Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we're tackling something absolutely fascinating. We're going to deconstruct the historical paradox of the Greyhound. Now, as a history professor, I am just endlessly captivated by this topic because it forces us to reconcile a pretty massive contradiction. We have to somehow separate the sleepy, affectionate, incredibly lazy dog that might literally be snoozing on your sofa right now from the mythic, high-octane dogs of the ancient pharaohs. For millennia, human beings have totally intertwined their own stories with this animal. So throughout our time today, we're going to use history, art, and a bit of anatomy to figure out exactly how this incredible creature evolved. We'll trace its journey from a deeply functional hunter surviving out in the harsh open plains, all the way to a heavily guarded symbol of European aristocracy.
There's this absolutely fantastic thought from our source material that perfectly sets the stage. A noble animal is often merely an animal upon whom the powerful have laid a velvet adjective. You see, human history has this incredible, almost stubborn habit of projecting its own vanity, its desperate need for status, and its desire for prestige right onto a naturally fast animal. So this isn't just some simple story about how we bred a fast dog to catch rabbits. No way. It's a story of how human beings engineered a walking, breathing status symbol to reflect their own power right back at them.
So here is our syllabus for today's historical investigation. First, we'll hit the Great Greyhound problem, followed by breed, type, or myth, then reading the historical evidence, identifying sighthound types, inventing the Noble Hound, and finally, a mirror to elite power.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Great Greyhound Problem.
You know, the actual word greyhound is, frankly, doing way too much heavy lifting in our modern language. When we say that word, we're actually collapsing three totally distinct historical streams into one very confusing puddle. First, you've got the modern pet, an animal with a closed registry, documented pedigrees, kennel club rules. Second, there's the ancient functional hunting type. This is a purely utilitarian animal that swept across open landscapes for thousands of years, way before anyone ever thought to write down a pedigree. And third, there is the romantic cultural myth, all those glamorous stories of Egyptian royalty and mythical kings that we retroactively attach to the dog currently living in our homes. Conflating these three entirely different concepts, well, that's what causes massive historical errors. We really have to separate the science from the mythology.
And to do that, we move right along to Section 2, breed, type, or myth.
To truly wrap your head around dog history, especially if you're just starting out, you need a simple analogy. Applying a modern breed standard to an ancient dog is exactly like forcing a rugged, prehistoric ancestor to wear a perfectly tailored modern tuxedo. It just doesn't fit the historical reality of their survival. A modern breed is strictly an administrative category, right? It relies on completely arbitrary human standards, like dictating the exact shape of an ear or the specific height of a shoulder, and those are enforced by registries. But an ancient type? That describes a purely functional form. It's a biological tool completely adapted to be a visual hunter in a wide open landscape. Basically, if the dog caught the hare and survived the desert, it was the right type. It literally couldn't care less about kennel standards.
And this is exactly why terminology matters so much to historians. The words we choose define the reality we're studying. Using the word sighthound scientifically places the dog in a functional family, based strictly on how it hunts, which is by utilizing immense visual processing and blinding speed. But when we read medieval texts, we often run into older, much more evocative terms like windhound or gazehound. These ancient writers obviously didn't have modern biology, but they definitely had poetry. I mean, imagine standing on a sweeping plain and watching a dog move so effortlessly fast that it seemed to be made of the wind itself. Still, using the correct scientific term today prevents us from lazily confusing a modern show dog with an ancient utilitarian working animal.
So, with our terms locked in, let's head into the historian's lab. Section 3, reading the historical evidence. When we examine ancient artifacts, like 3rd century BCE Hellenistic bronzes, we find absolute material proof of the animal's visual intelligence and its distinct physical shape. The long aerodynamic body and the intensely alert posture definitively prove that a highly specialized hunting tool existed in antiquity. But a quick warning from the professor here. This proves the existence of a functional sighthound type operating in the ancient world. It absolutely does not give us permission to jump to false, romanticized conclusions that this is some purebred ancestor of a specific modern breed. It is evidence of a working function, not a modern pedigree.
Think of historical continuity essentially as a mathematical chain of links. You can't just view history as a straight, unbroken line. It's more like multiplying fractions. If you multiply 1 times 1, you get 1. But if any essential link in the middle of that historical chain is weak or completely missing, say during the chaotic early medieval period, which essentially acts as a 0, well, the entire equation becomes 0. The continuity is completely broken. A splendid, highly documented Egyptian beginning cannot magically bridge a dark gap of several centuries just to satisfy our modern human desire for a perfect, romanticized pedigree.
So, how do we actually spot these ancient working dogs in the messy historical record? That brings us to Section 4, Identifying Sighthound Types.
Historians basically look for 3 specific functional steps to define a working sighthound in the field. First up is visual detection. The animal uses incredibly acute vision to scan the horizon, noticing the slightest twitch of prey long before a human eye ever could. Second is the pursuit. This is the deployment of explosive, high-pressure speed that absolutely forces the prey to its physical limits. And third is tactical coordination. These dogs didn't just operate alone. They possess the deep intelligence required to work as a coordinated pack, cutting off escape routes to secure the prey. This whole complex sequence of functions evolved organically, millennia before any Kennel Club standard was even a thought.
And their anatomy perfectly reflects this incredibly high-stakes function. The body of the sighthound is quite literally a biological engine designed for rapid horizontal displacement. The massive, deep chest acts as a powerful furnace for immense oxygen transport, fueling the muscles during an intense sprint. That incredibly narrow waist, it's an evolutionary choice to ruthlessly eliminate any useless mass that would just drag the dog down. And perhaps most importantly, the highly flexible spine isn't rigid at all. It acts as a loaded, coiling spring that mediates explosive power between the front and back legs with every single stride.
But resemblance across these different dogs isn't just one uniform scale. Height and form vary wildly depending on the specific terrain the animal had to conquer, and frankly the society it served. You've got the relatively compact whippet, designed for rapid snaps in enclosed spaces. Then, on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have the massive borzoi, bred specifically to hunt wolves alongside Russian aristocrats. The Afghan hound evolved distinct physical traits to navigate treacherous mountainous terrain, while the greyhound eventually became the most intensively codified and regulated runner in British history. The rule is simple. Form always follows the specific function dictated by the environment.
Eventually, this raw, biological speed collides head-on with human vanity. Section 5. Inventing the Noble Hound. When you look at aristocratic portraits from the Renaissance, like Paolo Veronese's famous Boy with a Greyhound, you're not just looking at a pretty picture painted to decorate a palace wall. To a historian, these paintings serve as absolutely critical primary evidence of elite display. The European nobility didn't just paint these dogs because they thought they were cute. These paintings proved that the animal's natural, biological speed had been entirely co-opted and transformed into a heavily guarded status symbol. A lean, powerful, and utterly composed hunting dog perfectly mirrored the exact image the aristocracy wanted to project about themselves to the rest of the world.
And that heavily guarded animal ultimately becomes a mirror, reflecting something much deeper about society. Section 6. A mirror to elite power.
Here's the brutal truth. Our historical archives are notoriously skewed toward this elite hoarding. Throughout the medieval period, brutal forest laws were actually passed to dictate exactly who could legally own a greyhound, based strictly on social rank. To protect the aristocracy's monopoly on hunting, commoners' dogs were often mutilated to prevent them from chasing game. Because history is written by the victors, the archives completely exclude the voices of the non-elite. The everyday people simply lacked the vast tracts of land, the immense leisure time required for training, and the legal rights necessary to keep such a highly specialized, noble creature. The dog quite literally became a boundary line between the rich and the poor.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with one final provocative question to ponder. Do we truly admire these ancient dogs for who they are, as unique and incredible biological creatures? Or do we revere them simply because they so brilliantly conquer the physical limitations, like explosive speed and acute sight that we fragile humans possess? It's a question that completely shifts your perspective, and it might just change exactly how you look at the Noble Hound currently resting quietly in your living room. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into history.